And of course, if I'm discussing Andrew Klavan's books, I have to bring on none other than Joey of the Geo and Joey Show, the only man who dreams about Klavan more than Klavan's wife does. How you doing, Joey?
Well, that might be true. I always say if Spencer Klavan can be his son and no relation, and I can be adopted in.
Yeah,
But no,
no.
I mean,
Yeah, no, you and I were just lamenting that we wish we lived closer to New York City because he's there signing new copies. And I'm really bummed because, like, I mean, maybe Barnes and Noble carries the new Cameron Winter book. I'm not holding my breath. So because Klavan is, outed conservative, he doesn't get a lot of airtime in the normal traditional bookstores. You can't probably walk into Barnes and Noble and get a Klavan book. So we're kind of relegated to buying from Amazon, which kind of sucks because we really want to help Klavan out. So we pre-order the books, but they don't ship the books before the books come out. So they ship them when the books come out. It already came out. We don't have it in our hand because we're waiting for the pre-orders to ship. So I don't know. I'm hoping it gets here pretty soon. We're discussing Strange Habit of Mind. This is book 2 in the Cameron Winter series by Andrew Klavan. And initial thoughts. Joey, is this better than When Christmas Comes? Is it worse? What do you think?
I think it was better. It was better in different ways. I liked some of the themes running through it. Some of them were a continuation of the last one, right? Like, Cameron Winters, obviously, the lost soul. In this book, we get more of a fleshed out of part of his past, right? So yeah, that was kind of a continuation, and we got a little bit more. One of the things that jumped out to me is and again, these aren't political books. These are just fun books. But like now when we put our, critic hats on and we're going through it, something that I saw was this. So obviously Cameron Winter's not a perfect dude, right? He's a guy who's a good guy, but he's got a past. But the one thing, we kind of saw the Me Too a little bit in that this guy obviously the book opens up, Adam Kemp commits suicide, right? That's how the book opens up. And something seems off, but part of the problem is he had been in Winter's school. He'd been one of his students, and he gets accused of sexual assault because him and a girl were both drunk and they sleep together. When Cameron had been the one guy who stood up to him, he thought, this was kind of a Me Too, college
Witch hunt kind of thing.
witch hunt. And he defended him, and then he ends up going, and then he goes and he meets this guy's girlfriend out in California after he committed suicide, after he died, and she's like this pretty girl who's like had been beat up, and then Cameron's all of a sudden like he feels like terrible because he defended this guy, and now he's like, well, maybe he really was bad. But
Right.
something I kind of thought in there, and I think it was one of the lines where it's like, sometimes I thought of the red pill, kind of that whole movement, how they're always criticizing feminism, but then they kind of become the thing that feminism accuses them of.
Sure.
And I kind of saw that theme in there a little bit, in
Hmm.
that there's this guy who was attacked, and yet ultimately he ends up becoming the thing that he was accused of, or the thing
Sure.
that,
Yeah, no, and that's true, and that's kind of what I think adds kind of like a lot of layers of complexity to Cameron Winter, is because he is kind of like this is kind of getting into the plot a little bit, but it's not spoiling anything. This is the plot of the story. Is the student commits suicide, and he reaches out to Cameron Winter, and he starts to uncover that this was a suicide, but he was kind of forced into it. He was kind of being manipulated into it by this powerful tech billionaire. And then, of course, Cameron Winter's Strange Habit of Mind, he starts to uncover a lot of people that cross this billionaire tech mogul guy. He's kind of a weird amalgamation of like Jack Dorsey and Bill Gates. I mean, I think he's got like he talks about him having like the weird prophet beard or whatever, like, like a Jack Dorsey. Yeah, the nose ring. but he's kind of like the philanthropist, got the Good World Project or whatever he calls it. He's kind of got like the Bill Gates thing going. So it's kind of like this mishmash of every globalist tech person that we hate in our culture. So this guy, and everyone who crosses him ends up dead in some way. And so, of course, Cameron Winter's trying to track him down. And that's kind of the noble thing. That's the knight in shining armor that we saw in When Christmas Comes. But you see the complexity when he finds out, oh, wait, this guy Adam Kemp, who I stood up for, he beat his girlfriend and was like a drug addict. Yeah, maybe him getting roughed up and, what happens in prison, maybe that was what he had it coming to him, and, fine. I don't care. It's like, well, you should probably care a little bit. He's still a human. He's still, but Cameron Winter's like, I don't care. He had what was coming to him. But it's more like, what is this guy, Gerald Byrne, who kind of forced him into this suicide? That's what Cameron Winter wants to defend. He's not, Adam Kemp is kind of he's just the spark that lights the fire for the story. He's not fighting to defend Adam Kemp's honor. He's like, whatever, that guy got what was coming to him. And he just moves on to fight this other battle. So you kind of see that a little bit. He's kind of got a little bit of a rough streak to him. But yeah, I agree that this book kind of fleshes out a lot more of his inner workings, and some of those themes carry over, which, you had mentioned, I guess I'll play this. I want to play this poem. Again, this is just the first stanza of a Wordsworth poem called The Intimations of Immortality. And just like When Christmas Comes, Klavan is weaving poetry throughout this book. Of course, Cameron Winter's a English poet of the English Romantics. He's like Klavan mixed with James Bond. So he has this poem, and you kind of mentioned it. There's something to this, and it's this last line of this first stanza. So let's take a listen really quick.
There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth. But yet I know, where'er I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth.
So that line in particular, right? You said like there passed away a glory from the earth, and that line stuck out to you. So I'm kind of curious. I kind of have my thoughts about that line, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Why that line in particular stood out to you, and it comes up pretty early in the book. So go ahead.
It comes up in the first chapter, and I believe the second chapter as well. Cameron Winters kind of I think one time is in the therapy session, but anyway, he brings it up twice. This there passed away a glory from the world, and what I kind of saw in that is, in the story, right, it was kind of fleshing out, right, he was kind of driftless, right, like you were saying before, right, he had his problems with his parents, right, his problems with his first love, the woman Charlotte that we were introduced to in the first book. And so he had those problems, right? He's got this friend, Roy. I won't spoil too much about their relationship, as much as it was. But
Yeah.
And there's these two young guys who they're both struggling, and obviously he has some problems where he's struggling with his racial identity, but they're both kind of struggling with, they're these tough men in a world that doesn't need them, right? It's like, the Don Quixote story, right? There's this knightly guy who's fighting windmills and shadows, and I think there's kind of this theme where they're these tough men, right? They're these men who are capable of incredible violence, even, who don't know what their place is in the world, and that's kind of part of the struggle of their story. Is, does the world need us, and how does it need us?
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's good. I think that the passing glory, it reminded me of, and I'm going to butcher this 'cause I'm not a huge C.S. Lewis fan, but it reminds me of like, in Joey, like hop in here and remind me of the C.S. Lewis quote. But he kind of talks about like when we find that there is like a joy or a pleasure that we can't meet here on Earth, that seems to indicate that we're meant for a different world. Like it's something like that, and I know I'm probably butchering it, but and the real C.S. Lewis fans are saying no, that's what it says, and they're quoting what book and line from it, but it's something like that. I like it's like this idea that all of these characters throughout here, the men in particular, obviously this is a spy book, you know, Winter, Byrne, Roy, Spawn, his friend, all of them are kind of, they're tiptoeing around and they're trying to figure out who, like, glory, God, the divine, the other world, like, and they're all kind of grasping at like what they think truth is, what they think that glory is, and they're all trying to kind of figure that out. And I think that's like kind of this underlying theme throughout here, and they all kind of come to different conclusions, and they have different results as end results that come from that, and they come to different conclusions. And of course, Cameron Winter, I think, is as the hero comes to the right conclusion by the end of it. But we'll get into that. But just to kind of like tease the worldview and what Gerald Byrne, so he's the main villain of this book, just to kind of tease early on, this poem, Ozymandias, is hinted at, and it's alluding to, and it's talking about Gerald Byrne. I keep calling him George Byrne. Gerald Byrne. And this kind of teases, I think, his character. And so take a look at this poem. This is from Bryan Cranston. It was from the and if you can't see it, someone put some pretty cool animation to it, but this was from like one of the promos near the end of Breaking Bad. So it's Bryan Cranston reading this short poem by Percy Shelley. And there's, if you can't see it, it's like this CGI of this kind of little dude in the desert walking up to
I met a traveler from
this
antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
Alrighty, so obviously that's again from Breaking Bad, which is, it's very fitting for Walt in that story. But it's this, and if you couldn't see it, it's this character's in this desert of just this wasteland, and he walks up to what's left of these two legs of this statue that's on a base, and the head has long since fallen off, and it's half buried in the sand or whatever. And he's kind of looking at this. This is obviously this monument to this long gone power, and on the base of it says, you know, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. You know, like this idea, this statue was made to some god, someone who had made themselves a god, but by the time, you know, history, like it's the passing glory, right? You've got this glory of whoever Ozymandias is. He built this huge statue. Well, now he's just nothing but ruins in this empty, barren desert and wasteland. So, you know, again, not to ruin too much about what happens to Gerald Byrne, but again, he's the villain of the story, so you could probably imagine it doesn't turn out too good for him. But like, that's kind of, he's like, he is, you know, you imagine Elon Musk, this king of kings as far as human, you know, standards goes. This is Gerald Byrne, and he's Ozymandias. He has this heightened view of himself, and he's just views himself as a god, and then he's just now lying in dust thousands of years later or whatever. There's nothing but remnants of them. So I think that's some of what that passing glory is too.
That kind of reminds me of the story of Nebuchadnezzar in the
Sure.
book of Daniel in the Bible, right? Where he says, right, God gives him a dream, right, which basically says there's going to be this passing of kingdoms. And then the very next thing he does is he builds an entire statue
Right.
out of gold, right? And says, like, no, actually, my kingdom's going to last forever, right? And so this is just kind of a theme that runs through human stories. And
Yeah.
Klavan, of course, being the literary man he is, I'm sure that all came into his mind.
Yeah, whenever somebody stands up and thinks, I am God, I am King of Kings, I am going to reign forever, that's about the time God says, maybe not so much, and it sends a Cameron Winter in to come and wreck their life. So, okay, so strange habit of mine, Andrew Klavan. We've got two men, Cameron Winter and Gerald Byrne, who are wrestling with trying to understand who they are and trying to understand who God is. And this clip right here, this is from the audiobook. This was Gerald Byrne is on a podcast. It's not really a Joe Rogan thing, but you kind of get the idea. It's like this huge global phenomenon of podcasting or whatever. He's doing this interview. And this is not just us imagining this, it's pretty well explicitly stated that this is kind of the revelation that Gerald Byrne has and he shares with the podcast host.
I thought to myself, if the patterns of reality can be infinitely transformed and rearranged by the mind of man, well, then I would begin a search, a quest, for that infinite freedom to make of the world not what was given to me, but whatever I would. I would essentially recreate the universe in the image of my own soul. There was a pause, and then he added, let there be light,
So yeah, this is Gerald Byrne's philosophy was, I want to make some sense out of my life. And so I'm going to go on a journey and I'm basically going to become God. Let there be light. I'm going to recreate the world. And this is ultimately what he goes on, at least from a human standpoint, to do. He becomes this tech billionaire. He starts this organization that is basically like the World Economic Forum, one of the globalist elites that can just do whatever he wants and shape the course of humanity. And he basically becomes God. He becomes Ozymandias, at least in his own eyes.
Well, and what I'm hearing is Gerald Byrne is our society, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the book by Carl Trueman, right? The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. But so much of what we see, right, and that's why I love literature, but so much of what we see, that's what it is, right? We all think we can become God, right? We can write our own reality, right? Whether it's the gender stuff or sexuality, we determine, right? We look into our own soul and we determine what reality will be.
Yeah, no, and that is, I mean, all the way back to Genesis 3, I guess, where Satan tells Adam and Eve, but Eve, if you eat this fruit, you'll be like God. And that is one of the core deceptions, and I think that's a lot of what we as people are doing is, and I think this is another thought from C.S. Lewis, but again, I'm not a huge C.S. Lewis fan despite having referenced him twice in this episode, is he does talk about like this idea of like striving for greatness and desiring to be great and to have purpose and to have an identity, and like that isn't a wrong thing. It just needs to be properly placed under understanding who God is. That is a God thing, to be relevant and to be having meaning and purpose. We're eternal creatures who are going to have an eternal identity and an eternal being, but to find that in ourselves, as you said, the rise and triumph of the modern self, just this idea that I am kind of the core of truth and being, like everything revolves around me. I mean, it's the antithesis to like if, Jordan Peterson always talks about his rules are like these simple, stupid little rules that our parents used to always tell us, but we never really understood what they meant and what when they say the world doesn't revolve around you. That's kind of just a cautionary warning saying you aren't the center of the universe. It doesn't, you can't carry that weight of you being the center of the universe. And when you try to do, you're going to be like the Nebuchadnezzar, like you referenced, building the statue to yourself and ultimately it's going to crumble and fall apart. So and this goes even on a little bit more explicitly. I won't play the clip for this one, but Gerald Byrne then goes on basically like a spiritual quest. He goes to visit this shaman, and he takes ayahuasca and has this weird trip where he feels like he's melting into the ground and all this kind of stuff. But then he says he like melts into all of these galaxies, and he starts to have this vision. And this is where, again, it comes back to at the end of When Christmas Comes, when it basically says like the center of the world basically is that nativity story, man, wife, and a child. Both Winter and Byrne have this, they're the child, and they both have a mother and a father, but their relationship with their mother and father is complicated in both cases, and very distorted and broken. So they're both lacking that core, that center, that thing that represents God to them, right? The Bible talks about husband and wife being a picture of Christ's love for the church. Well, both of these men are lacking that. They have no picture of the divine. So Byrne, and I'm curious to know if like your thoughts on this too, but like Byrne goes on this quest, has this trip, and he has this vision where he's a boy again, and he sees his mother and father as they were when he was a child, and then he's about to go through this door into enlightenment, it says, and this monster, this grotesque monster, is blocking his way. Well, then a savior comes to deliver him. And he's like, who is the savior? Is it my mother? Is it my father? No, it's me. I'm the savior that comes. And he has this revelation. And again, it's that modern self. It's me. I'm the savior. I'm the God. I am the center of the universe. This is Byrne's conclusion after this spiritual quest he goes on. And then he goes on to become the billionaire, corrupt, evil man that he becomes.
Yeah, no, that's really perceptive point, and that's how that kind of thing always works, right? In other words, when we struggle, right, whether like Cameron and like Byrne both having this struggle, right? I think that's kind of the difference between, say, just bringing it to Christianity, right? Between, you know, in real life, right? Religion and stuff says, okay, well, there is a truth, there is a way, there is a path out of your uncertainty, out of your struggle, out of your lack of knowing where you fit. There is a way, and it's through discipline and ultimately, you know, studying, you know, a religious text, right? Studying the scriptures, and then ourselves and our way, right? Well, I'm gonna go take a drag. I'm gonna become one with the universe, right? When I was reading this part, I'm like, oh, Joe Rogan, hardest hit. But it's like, but that's kind of this thing. There's this desire to, and I think it's a good desire. I think ultimately, right? I think most, I'll go with the ancient Greeks on this one. I think most desire is good. Even illicit desires they're calling for something good. So what Byrne is going for, that's good, right? He wants to be complete, right? His childhood was actually quite tragic, right? And I won't give away what happened with his parents, but it's quite tragic. So he wants to be complete, yet he's going again to this other source, right? Where he could say, oh, I've got enlightenment because I'm putting this thing in. But really, I mean, it's just it's just consorting with demons.
Yeah, he's just doing this. Well, and that's that's interesting that you mentioned that, and I think that's also insightful that he ends up going and he has all these experiences where he's searching for purpose and he's searching for meaning, and he kind of, and it's talked about how he does go through all of these drugs and drinking and women. He's got a different woman every night. Different woman every night, or different women every night, who knows? But and it goes back to that Wordsworth poem of this passing glory from the earth. We think that those things are like the ultimate, like you said. Even those illicit desires there's pleasure, there's excitement, there's happiness, there is joy to be found in that, but it's a passing glory. It's a shadow. It's a cheap imitation of the glory that can be found truly in a relationship with God. And then on this path, he doesn't look outward to God out there. He ends up looking inward, which is different than what Cameron Winter does. Now, of course, this is all just a picture, and this is not a spoiler in any way to the story, but Winter kind of being the antithesis, he's the protagonist, and Byrne is the villain. Byrne looks inward rather than looking outward to the God that's there and out there. And they talk about how masculine and feminine, he does talk about this, Klavan brings this out, are the two representatives of the two, sides of God, the masculine and feminine side of God. And both of them together give us this picture of God. And so Winter, throughout the story, ends up realizing that his therapist, Margaret, is functioning like a mother figure for him. He's confessing his sins to her, and he's asking her to absolve him of the sins he's done, the killings he's done in the past. And then at the end, it explicitly says the recruiter, who's like a religious man, he's a Jesus dude, he starts to see him like a father figure. And the recruiter tells Winter, you're going to have to just place your trust in me and believe me as your father figure. And Winter ends up having to basically trust him implicitly to save his life. So he ends up externalizing, and he, rather than Byrne looking inward, is looking outward and saying, okay, here is God out there. God is not me. God is out here. And here I've got the mother and the father. Byrne, kind of does the opposite. And Winter's envious, though, of Byrne. I think there's, I think that's the harder path to walk when we're subjecting ourselves to God. It's easier, I think, sometimes to go the Byrne route, right? I mean, isn't that kind of our experience? I mean, I don't know how envious you are sometimes of people who don't follow God, but you do sometimes look at their life and you think, man, I know in light of eternity that's not the way to go, but it seems like a easier life or a better life.
We're in good company. Hey, David, the psalmist, he asked the same thing. He's like, God, why do the righteous suffer while the wicked are prospered?
Right.
And God's like, if you could only know from my perspective, right? Like it's their prospering is for this lifetime.
Yeah. God's looking at it from to go back to Ozymandias again, God's looking at it from that standpoint. There's just empty wasteland, and now here's Nebuchadnezzar's statue basically laying in ruins. I mean, nobody even unless you've read the Bible and know the book of Daniel, no one even knows who Nebuchadnezzar is. I mean, maybe they would know the name from the Matrix. That's the ship of the Matrix and the Matrix. But nobody even knows who Nebuchadnezzar is. He's gone. But he was the king of kings in the Babylonian Empire, and he's just gone. So looking at it from God's viewpoint, from an eternal standpoint, which is that's the opposite of the modern self, the Carl Truman. We think I'm the center of the universe, and God's like, no, like you're barely a speck on a speck in a galaxy, which is a speck in the universe. You are essentially nothing, outside of the value that God assigns to us. One last thing that I took away, and we can end with this, but I'm not necessarily wanting to put a time frame on this necessarily, but I do think I want to play this clip, and I want to delve into this and share my thoughts on this. This is again, this is not giving anything away, but this is Molly. This is Gerald Burns' wife, and she's kind of the Cinderella girl that's just plain Jane from the Midwest who gets picked up by this essentially Elon Musk tech billionaire kind of guy. And she recognizes that Byrne is still smoking dope. He's still not happy. There's still not that peace that he's found. And she's relating how she found him that night. And she says this to him.
Jewelry, clothes, a whole new wardrobe. I had no money of my own. He gave me a credit card so I could buy myself whatever I wanted. I objected, even at the time. I told him I didn't want any of it, but he pleaded with me. He said, a boy likes to give things to his girl. It was such a sweet thing to say. I couldn't bring myself to make him stop. But now that we were married, I told him the truth. I said I didn't care if he gave me clothes. I didn't care how big our houses were. I really didn't. I never did. It was him. It was him I wanted. And if he gave me the world and kept himself from me, I told him, then he would have given me nothing.
So I kind of had to listen to that and think in terms of like, again, remember, Molly is this woman, this, and I think some of the metaphors kind of get mixed a little bit, but Klavan is looking to Charlotte, his past, his younger flame, to kind of be that divine.
Winter.
What did I say? Klavan? Did I say Klavan? Oh,
Yeah.
see, that's how much he's embedded himself in Karen Winter. So he's looking to Charlotte, and I think Molly could be that mother figure, that woman, that divine thing for Byrne, but he's going about it the wrong way. And I just thought, like, this is from God's perspective. So many times we as people try to buy God's love and his favor and his relationship and his whatever. So we whatever it is we might try to do for him, and we try to give him these cheap trinkets that he doesn't need. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He paves his streets with gold. No, he doesn't need anything that we can give him. He just wants us. And we're down here saying, well, God, here, I'll do this for you, and I'll give you this, and I'll do, and like Molly's saying, she's like, I don't want the stuff. I just want you. But Byrne couldn't settle with that. He was just trying to buy this affection and buy this love.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, one thing that I kind of think he was looking to her. So, because obviously he met her after his ayahuasca trip. That's not giving too much away. And he kind of he sees this girl. He basically says, like, I was super impressed by you, intrigued by you. I like you, right? I want to be just with you, all that. But like, well, that's a good thing, right? And I think people do this too. I'm a single guy, right? Like, I've been in dating circles, and like, I think people do this a lot, right? Where we build up kind of a romanticized view of, like, speaking as a man, like, of women, right? So we say, like, maybe we're not happy in singleness, right? And the Bible, right? In the very beginning of the Bible, God says it's not good that man to be alone. So that's natural. But then we look at it, and so we're looking for completion in another person. But so we kind of, there can be this tendency, and Klavan's talked about this before, this tendency to kind of put women on this pedestal, and like, we're going to look to them for our fulfillment. And I feel like that's kind of what Byrne was doing. So he's got this emptiness with his mother, right? But rather than deal with that, right, ultimately surrendering it to God, right, to looking, right, he's just looking to replace it, right? And so this woman, who is, I believe, she's a good woman, right? She's a caring woman, right? And yet he can't actually have the thing that he wants that would satisfy him in a relationship, because he's putting an unrealistic fulfillment on this woman, right?
Right.
Whereas just taking her as a woman.
Yeah. No, and I think that Molly, so with Winter, he kind of goes through the arc where I think he realizes, and it was in When Christmas Comes, and it's in the second one as well, where that's what he's trying to do. One of the things he's working through with Margaret, is his therapist, is he's trying to let go. He's got this melancholic view of the past, and he can't let this Charlotte go. And so he's looking to Charlotte to be God in an unhealthy way, to the extent that ends up being exploited and almost used against him in this book, where a cheap imitation of Charlotte, of who Charlotte could be, is used against him. And he has to basically say, no, this isn't the right pedestal to put women on. And so he looks to Margaret, I think in the proper sense, this is a mother. And they even say, like, if we weren't decades apart, there could have been something more between them than this relationship than they have. There could have been a romantic relationship, but that's not meant to be. And so that's put in its proper context, where Byrne couldn't do that with Molly, I think ultimately because he viewed himself as God. He wasn't, that was who he thought God was himself. And so, again, I think I like this one better, I think, than When Christmas Comes. I just liked it more because I think that to have both of them side by side, you had two men one the villain, one the protagonist, and they're kind of like anti versions of themselves, and it kind of delved into this idea of like, who is God and what should our proper relationship with God be. And I'm curious to know where he's going to go with this. The people who were able to get their hands on the book when it actually came out have said The House of Love and Death is really good. It would be nice to have a copy of it. So, concluding thoughts, what do you think, Joey?
Well, so I was just gonna say, maybe I'll ask you if you've thought about this. Who are you looking forward to bringing Cameron Winters to life on the big screen? If you could pick any actor,
it's very hard for me to not view him this way. It's geez, I'm gonna butcher he played in the Hannibal TV show. He played Will Graham. And his name is...
I've never seen that.
You've never seen it? Oh my gosh. Geez, I think his last name is Dempsey. Hugh Dancy.
Patrick Dempsey?
No, Hugh Dancy. I'm sorry. He's an English actor. And this is not going to show up at all. Oh yeah, it kind of does.
Oh yeah, it does.
This is him, and it's hard for me to not view when I picture him, because in Hannibal, he has kind of a strange habit of mind. He's a detective, and he can just see a crime scene and visualize it, and so it's hard for me to not. And he's kind of, he does have some of the, the book smart, the, whatever. So it's just, I know that they would never probably be able to get somebody like that, and it's too similar of a character, but that's who I see when I visualize it. But what about you?
So I was thinking, I think he would have to grow his hair out a little bit, because there's some references to Cameron Winter, I think, having a little bit longer hair. But I think he said something not to his shoulder, something about past his ears or something.
Yeah.
Whatever it was. But Chris Pratt, I think Chris Pratt would do a good job. He's bald.
Yeah.
Because but he's not like, because the impression I get from Cameron Winter is that he's a strong guy, but he doesn't necessarily like, when he's in his suit and stuff, he doesn't necessarily always like, he's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
He's a tough guy.
No, you're right. And I would like to see, I know it's probably tough with the Daily Wire to, they don't want to just stay in their wheelhouse. And I understand that there's probably like, because I think of like, I kind of feel like, man, we've been saying for a while now, another kingdom. We want to see Klavan's Another Kingdom, on the big screen or on the small screen. And he's like, oh no, that's too big of a project. And now they're doing the Pendragon series. I'm like, can't be any more or less expensive than it would be to do Another Kingdom, right? And like, so like, why did they stiffed Klavan's Another Kingdom? But I can understand they're probably like, listen, we can't just only do Daily Wire stuff, and like, it's kind of almost like we're being self-serving at that point. So I get it. It's probably a strange dynamic, and knowing Klavan, I don't think he would want it that way. I think he would want not like an affirmative action, like, oh, Klavan's gonna get it just because he's Klavan. I think he probably would want to earn it, and so I don't know. We'll see as the series goes on. Maybe he'll earn it. Maybe I'm not Klavan, and I'm going to say, Jeremy, give us a Cameron Winter series. Give us a Cameron Winter series. No, it would be good. These books would translate well into maybe not a 10-episode series, like, each season. But if you did, 4 or 5, I think, you could probably get 4 or 5 out of each book. And I don't know, Jeremy, get on it. Let's do it. All right, Joey. Well, thank you again for joining me. It's been a pleasure.